Welcome to the Mid Week Tease with me, Adelle Onyango, where I share some random and not too random thoughts on things. And in this episode that I am recording from in front of my fire, so if you hear any cackling, please just understand. Just understand the cold season has kind of sort of begun. Anyway, in this episode, I want to talk about the family patterns that we inherit and what it takes to break them. Because I have a feeling that most of us who listen to the shows here at Legally Clueless Africa, who read the newsletter, who come for the talks, I have a feeling that you are the breakers of generational patterns in your families. I have a hunch. Am I right? Let me know in the comments wherever you're listening to this on. But I want to start this episode with a question. If someone studied your family for, let's say, the past 3 generations, what patterns would they find? Now, your answer should not be about what jobs people had or where people lived or who married who. I'm really talking about deeper things. So your answer needs to look at, how did people handle conflict? How did they express love? What happened when someone was struggling? How were emotions treated? What did the women in the family believe they had to sacrifice? What did the men believe they had to suppress? What were people not allowed to talk about? Oof, 10 of that one, Because one thing I've come to understand is that families pass down a lot more than genetics. A lot more than just looking like each other, by the way. Families pass down beliefs, fears, coping mechanisms. They pass down ways of relating to ourselves and to other people. Ooh, they pass down survival strategies. Oof. And I think that most of us inherit these things without ever consciously choosing them. We just kind of absorb them. We've grown up for decades thinking it's normal. And then, which is why I think you are a generational breaker if you're listening to this, because one day in adulthood, we realize some of these things that we call personality traits are actually family patterns, So it's not just, oh, this is just who I am. A lot of that was learned, A lot of the things that we think are our choices, we really inherited. And the reason I want to talk about this is because breaking generational cycles, it's not just about identifying what hurt us, because I think that's where a lot of us start and stop. I think it's also about becoming conscious enough to decide what we want to carry forward and what ends with us. It's so funny because I think about my mom a lot, but I've been thinking about her a lot more in the past couple of weeks. It hit me that I learned a lot of kindness from her. So for those of you who follow me on Instagram, you know that I live on a farm, and so I grow vegetables. And I share these vegetables with family members, with friends, and, people I care about. And I was doing deliveries a couple of days ago of broccoli and cauliflower to my aunties. And I suddenly remembered, oh my God, I really did learn kindness. Like, it was modeled to me by my mom. I started remembering how every Christmas, a couple of years before she died, my mom would buy cakes, like big cakes for different families. And she would have them delivered. This was before taxi apps and like motorcycle apps for deliveries. She would have these cakes delivered to each family to say Merry Christmas. And And I was delivering my vegetables and I just thought, oh my goodness, I did learn kindness from this lady. And the way she showed kindness to anyone and everyone was something that in the generations before her and even those around her, this was unique to her in terms of the intentionality. She broke a cycle there. She broke cycles in the way she mothered me. And why I'm saying me is, I can't speak on behalf of my sisters, but my mom had a very non toxic way of mothering me. I can count the number of times that she physically beat me, which was the norm in that generation, right? We would have conversations. We would go for concerts together. There was a generational pattern where children feared parents that my mom broke, right? Anyway, so that's why I was like, oh, I have to talk to you about this. Now, I remember reading about family systems from a psychologist who also happens to be a family therapist. I think I've talked about them to you before, Murray Bowen. And one of the ideas that really caught my attention is that families function like emotional systems. So, what this means is that everyone is influenced by everyone else. So the patterns don't exist in isolation. They're passed down, repeated, reinforced, normalized. And another thing is every family has rules. And most of these rules are never actually spoken. Like there's no daily family gathering or meeting where everybody's told, hey, these are the 12 commandments of this family. No, you just kind of learn them and you absorb them. And, a rule, for example, maybe in your family was like, don't challenge elders, what I was talking about, which I think is a rule my mom broke and decided it was going to end with her. Maybe it was women must endure. Maybe it was don't complain, just be grateful all the time. Maybe, and this one I find to be so toxic, it was keep the peace no matter what. Don't cry. Success is good, but don't make other people uncomfortable with it. Am I shouting? And because these rules are invisible, as I say, there's no meeting to reinforce them. We don't realize how deeply they've shaped us. So, for example, if you grew up in a family where expressing your needs was seen as selfish, as a grown up, you may struggle with boundaries. Or if you grew up in a family where conflict was avoided at all costs, you may find yourself as a grown up completely terrified of difficult conversations. Or maybe you grew up in a family where women were praised for sacrificing themselves, and you may grow up to be a woman who feels guilty every time you prioritize yourself. The family rules become the lens through which we see the world. And many of us are still living by these rules that we never consciously agreed to. You know what I mean? So, another question. What were the unspoken rules in your family? And which of those rules are helping you? And which of those rules are costing you your peace? You don't even have to share your answers with me. Just think about it, right? What were the unspoken rules in your family? And out of those rules, which ones are helping you and which ones are costing you your peace? I feel like one of the easiest things to do is to identify what hurt us. But what is a bit trickier is identifying what we are carrying forward. There is a researcher who specializes in trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, and they talk about how trauma often continues through the adaptations we make to survive it. And this is such an important part because, a lot of us think that trauma can only be passed down through abuse. No, it can also get passed down through coping mechanisms, through survival strategies, through habits that once protected us, right? So take hyper independence, for example. This is something, I'm so glad I'm at the tail end of erasing this one. But a lot of us wear it like a badge of honor, right? I don't need anybody. I can figure myself out. I'll carry it. But if we were truly honest with ourselves, if you're a hyper independent person, you will acknowledge that hyper independence isn't freedom. It's not. It's protection, right? It's what happens when you learn that it's not safe to rely on other people. And that's just one, right? Hyper independence. There's people pleasing, perfectionism, emotional shutdown, conflict avoidance, constantly feeling responsible for everybody else's emotions. And yes, at some point, these behaviors probably helped us, right? They probably even protected us. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that what protected us in one season can imprison us in another season. Another question, which I think requires a lot of courage, but I believe in you. I think you can answer this. What am I doing today that once kept me safe but is no longer serving me? This is such an important question. It's how I figured out hyper independence is costing me my peace. People pleasing is costing me my identity. And so it's really about deciding whether you still want that behavior to lead your life. And yes, you can acknowledge it protected you at a point, but bro, you can also decide that it's now overstayed, you know? Now, because I really know this space, I created it for primarily women. I want to talk about something that I know many women will relate to. Being the first woman who chooses differently. Change in one person affects the entire family system. And if you've ever started healing, you've probably experienced this, hey? Maybe you're the first in your family to go to therapy. Maybe you're the first to set boundaries. Maybe you're the first person to leave an unhealthy relationship, or you're the first person to choose rest instead of burnout. Women, am I shouting? Maybe you're the first person to decide you don't want children. That one was hit close to home. Maybe you're the first person to just openly prioritize your mental health. And suddenly you're being called difficult, or you're being called selfish, or you're hearing statements like, oh, you've changed, or you're becoming too much. But here's something I've been thinking about, hey? I think sometimes people aren't reacting to your boundary. They're reacting to what your boundary represents. I mean, there's also the people who are reacting because they used to really enjoy when you had no boundaries. They're those ones. But there's also people reacting to what your boundary represents, because your boundary represents a possibility. It represents another way of living, another way of loving, another way of existing. And sometimes that can be so uncomfortable to other people who have been part of a family system that has made them believe they had no choice. And now watching someone else choose differently, oh, that feels uncomfortable. It can feel like, if you're the cycle breaker, that you're being punished for changing. But I think what's happening is that you are being punished for reminding everyone else that change is possible. And that can be very lonely. That can be very lonely, because breaking cycles is not just about healing. It's also about being misunderstood. It's about you being okay with disappointing people. It's about you choosing your well-being even when other people don't understand why. And that is not easy. It's so lonely, right? Now, I want to bring another layer here, because I think sometimes when we're talking about breaking generational cycles, we can get stuck in like blaming our parents. This is not to excuse them or not to hold them accountable, But I don't think blame is where freedom lives. I always talk about Gabor Mate because he often asks us to understand context, to understand that people parent from their own wounds, that our parents inherited things as well, and their parents inherited things, and their parents inherited things. So when you start looking at family histories, you start to see the different things people were carrying, be it violence, poverty, colonial trauma, religious shame, um, patriarchal expectations, fear, survival. That one. Emotional neglect. You know, the other day I wrote about my dad. I do some long form writing on my Instagram, and I turned 2 years in my sober journey. And I was writing about my dad, who definitely had a drinking problem, um, and was pretty violent because of it to my mom. And I remember being, you know, speaking about habits, I learned my hypervigilance from watching him as he drank and knowing when the tip would happen that would signal to me we're unsafe because he's about to be violent. But as I was growing up and as I was doing my healing work, I started to unpack like what was my dad carrying? Not to excuse him. I still hold him very accountable. I can love him and be pissed off by how he treated us and my mom. My dad is deceased, by the way. Um, but I started saying this guy was like firstborn African son by, I don't know, 30? He had most of his kids and a law firm supporting his siblings, and his dad died before I was born. So I also wondered, the way grief kicked my ass, I wonder if this guy had a space to grieve. You know what I mean? So I started to be like, what was he carrying? And that allowed me to have compassion. But at the same time, when I say compassion, compassion is not synonymous with like self abandonment, right? So I'm not excusing. Um, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I have forgiven him, but he's passed away, so that there's no reconciliation there. And compassion doesn't mean unlimited access. I think you can understand why someone became who they are, and you can still have your boundaries. And you can love someone and you can still choose distance. You can still hold them accountable. You can have empathy for someone's pain, and you can still refuse to accept their behavior that's harmful. These things can exist together. And I think there's a lot of liberation that comes from that. And it can really help you be the cycle breaker in your family. Okay, so away from our parents, let's come back to you and I. um, because it's very easy to spend a lot of time looking backwards, but eventually healing is going to ask us to look forward. And the question I want to ask is what are you passing down? Do you know what I mean? If someone inherited your way of living, what would they inherit? Would they inherit anxiety, self criticism, burnout, fear? Or would they inherit self worth and joy and rest and honesty and emotional safety and courage? Breaking generational cycles is not only about what you're refusing to pass on, but it's also about what you are intentionally creating. I see that in my own life, and how, especially like being in business, not very, actually, none of the generations before me and around me are in business and are living an alternative lifestyle, the way I am. And I say alternative in quotes because honestly, the way I'm living is how our ancestors lived. So I'm just like, you know what I mean? But anyway, you get what I mean when I use the word alternative. And so I'm intentionally doing that, not only because it feels good for me, but I want to add another option of womanhood on the spectrum for my nieces and nephews to see. So, yeah, what are you intentionally creating? And so, as I close, every family passes something down. Some pass down silence, some pass down shame, some pass down fear, self sacrifice, and every once in a while, someone decides that the inheritance changes with them. I have a feeling you are that person. And you decide this not because you're perfect, not because you've healed everything, not because you have all the answers, but because you've become conscious. Because you've stopped running on autopilot. Because you've started asking the difficult questions. Because you have become willing to choose differently. And every time you choose, let's say, honesty over silence or boundaries over exhaustion and resentment, rest over burnout, self-worth over self-abandonment, every time you choose better, you are changing something bigger than yourself. And I've given you many questions in this episode. But I'm going to leave you with two. When future generations in your lineage, in your family, when future generations look back at you, what will they say ended with you? I start off by telling you about my mom's kindness, about her way of mothering, and the many things that I can say that ended with her. What is going to end with you when down your lineage they look back? And the last question is, when future generations in your family look back at you, what will they say began with you? Oof. Listen, if you want to share your answers to all the questions I've left you with in this episode, you can do so in the comments section. This is a safe space and I love hearing from you. And if you connected with this episode, make sure you share it with someone that you love. Thanks for listening to the Mid Week Tease, a Legally Clueless Africa production. Episodes go out every Wednesday, and you can learn more about us by going to legallycluelessafrica.com.